Hey fiddlers, today we are going to be talking about how to take your jigs from this to this. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to this month's Fiddle Focus video. This month we are talking about a topic that was requested by my wonderful patrons over on patreon.com/LizViolaMusic. So folks were wondering, how do we take a jig from sounding more kind of plodding and make it into something that sounds danceable? Sometimes when we learn tunes for the first time, they can sound a little bit like etudes. They just don't sound like the sort of thing that makes you want to tap your foot. But then somehow there's this magical thing that can happen that can make a tune sound like you want to dance to it. This is a question I also get sort of from classical musicians more frequently, people who play classical violin. They're wondering basically, what is it that makes a jig sound less classical, less like this, and more like this. The first sounds very much like a classical piece. The second sounds a lot more like something you might hear in an Irish session. So I'm going to take you through 3 tips on how to make your jigs sound more danceable and more fiddly. Tip number 1, and I think that this is actually the most crucial thing. When you're playing a jig, generally, you are not going to be playing all of those eighth notes exactly equally. So in a jig, it's 6/8 time, and we have 6/8 notes per measure, or the equivalent. So for example, let's take a tune called Rosin the Bow that I really like to play. It's a jig, and you could play it like this. In that way of playing it, all your eighth notes are exactly equal. But really what we want to do is we want to give the jig a little bit of a dotted rhythm. Here's what I mean by that. In each group of 3 eighth notes that you encounter in this tune, you're going to play the first eighth note a little longer, so it might be more like a dotted eighth note. The second note is going to be pretty short, so it might be more like a 16th note. And the last note is sort of medium, which is more like an eighth note. That sounds really complicated, and it might be a lot to try and think about in the moment, so it's better just to get a sense of how it feels and sounds to play it that way. Here's what it sounds like in slow motion on an open string. Instead of, you've got, or in a set of 6/8 notes, and you can practice that rhythm on an open string just to get the feel of it. It'll go like this. That sounded like this before is going to sound more like this. This takes a little getting used to, and I recommend listening to other fiddlers playing jigs. If you want an especially dotted rhythm, listen to some Cape Breton fiddlers, people like Natalie McMaster, who really extend that first note in a set of 3, and then the other 2 are much shorter. It can be helpful to listen a lot, even try playing along, and just get the feel of it. And now moving on to tip number 2, use shorter bows. When you're playing up to speed and you're trying to use big bows, it comes across sounding kind of laborious and plodding like this. Which, aside from sounding not quite the way you might want it to, is just not super fun. You really want to economize your bow. Use just like this much. I actually mean that. And then you're going to have a little bit more lightness in your sound. You can still keep weight on the bow, but the shorter bows are definitely going to give it this kind of buoyancy. So here's what that'll sound like. And tip number 3, this is a general rule that's great for fiddling in general. Really relax that right arm. When you're trying to give a tune a sense of buoyancy and lift, it just doesn't get that feeling if your arm is really tense. This is what it might sound like if you have a lot of tension in your shoulder and your wrist and your hand. Even if you're using shorter bows and you've got the jig rhythm, it still just doesn't sound like you want to dance to it. There are a lot of things that can help you relax your bow arm, but I think one of the key things is really thinking about it as starting from your shoulder. You know those marionette puppets, like in that scene from The Sound of Music? They're really floppy, but then they have strings holding up their joints. That's kind of the feeling that you want to have in your bow arm. It's not collapsed, but it's very loose and relaxed. And then you'll get a sound a little bit more like this. Alright you guys, that is it for this fiddle focus video. If you want to vote for topics for videos like this, or if you also want fiddle lesson videos and sheet music for a tune a month, like the tune that I played today, Rosin the Bow, you can get all of that over on patreon.com/LizFaiella where there's a really awesome community of fiddlers who are learning these tunes along with variations, harmonies, all kinds of good stuff. So check that out, stay tuned for more videos, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye guys!